Thanks. I'm happy that so many of you are interested in talking about grammar and punctuation. I'm going to tell you briefly, or as an overview, what my book addresses. And it doesn't address grammar from the ground up. It's not everything anybody ever learned about grammar or needs to know. It covers just the mistakes that people usually make, or the problems that they usually encounter in the sentences that they write. And it really doesn't matter what you're writing, whether you're writing for business or you're writing an email to a friend or you're writing something, an academic paper. I mean, sentences are sentences. Fiction doesn't count. Poetry doesn't count. You can do what you want. You're home free. But when you're writing about situations that have occurred or are occurring or will occur, then grammar and punctuation do count. So I'll tell you how my book progresses. It has 7 chapters, and let me start at the end. The 7th chapter is on punctuation, and it describes every mark that you'll need when you write in business correspondence or for your school papers or whatever, emails to friends. It tells you what the marks do and what they won't do. It tells you the common mistakes that people make, the confusion that people have, sometimes between a semicolon and a colon, for example, or between a dash and a hyphen. That's a very common confusion that I run into, people typing a hyphen and thinking that it's a dash. You know what I'm talking about? A hyphen is the smallest horizontal line that you can find on your keyboard, and in order to create a dash, which is a very different mark, you need to hit that hyphen key twice, typically. Sometimes it closes up on the screen, sometimes it doesn't, but that's a dash, and it does something very different from what hyphens do. So people do run into confusion when it comes to punctuation. As a matter of fact, I would say most people couldn't tell you how to use a comma. Certainly in some sentences we know where commas belong, but questions arise. People typically ask, well, do you need the comma before and when you have 3 or more items in a series? In the writing that you're reading, the professional writing that has been professionally written and edited, sometimes you'll see that comma and sometimes you won't. I don't know whether you pay attention to that kind of thing. Of course I do. But that can be confusing. You know, how come Time Magazine is not putting it in and the New Yorker is putting it in? If you take a look at sentences that contain items in a series. The rule is, just to answer that question right now, that you do put it in, that it gives equal attention to all the items in a series without making the last 2 look more related than any others. That's the tradition, that's the original rule. Many publications follow it, and yet some authors and editors and publications are choosing not to follow it. So that's why you see it both ways. I follow the rule. I think it makes sense, not just because I like rules, although I do, but because it makes sense in that it gives every item equal attention, and there's no lack of clarity, communicating that the last 2 items are somehow more related than the first 2 or the first 3. Anyhow, so the last chapter does cover all the typical questions and issues that arise with the different punctuation marks. But the rest of the book, the first 6 chapters, are about grammar and usage. You know, there are certain ways in which we use words that are not strictly a grammar matter, but a usage matter. Let me be more specific. Sometimes with prepositions, you know, those little words like of, to, from, around, about, above, beyond, below, past, by, under, over, those little words. We have a lot of idioms. For example, we can be confused by something. We can be confused over something, I believe. It's probably acceptable, but we can't be confused to something. Now, that's not grammar. I mean, the grammar's the same with those 3 examples. But the usage is not. I mean, it's just that we're never confused to, are we? We're confused by, we're concerned over. Sometimes we can be confused, in relation to, and we can have all kinds of connecting words that follow confused, but to isn't one of them. So my book does cover a couple of usage issues, too. The first chapter covers case. I'm sorry to use this grammar term, and I'll tell you what it is. I did use regular grammar terms because if I had to replace them, I would have to use words like hot dog and hamburger, and then you'd have to remember throughout the book that a hot dog is an adjective and a hamburger is an adverb, and it seemed to me just the same trouble, so I used the regular words. Case refers to forms of pronouns. You know, is it I, is it me, is it myself, right? Stephen invited Susan and I to dinner. No. Stephen invited Susan and me to dinner? Yes. Stephen invited Susan and myself to dinner, which is a very common error these days, using myself when it should be I or when it should be me. That's not correct either. When do we use myself? Well, that's the kind of thing that Chapter 1 does cover. Chapter 2 is called Agreement, and it has to do with subjects and verbs. Remember those? And agreement refers to number. So if the subject is plural, the verb has to be in a plural form. If the subject is singular, etc. Sounds pretty simple and basic. You learned it a long time ago. You get it right most of the time. But there are situations that confuse us, or situations that we don't handle correctly. We aren't even confused. We just don't know what's going on. There are some nouns that are singular and plural in Latin ways that not everybody's familiar with. For example, media. You know, very few people are handling that right these days. Media is plural. The media are represented here today. You know, and the singular is medium. Of course, nobody talks about a newspaper correspondent as coming from a medium, but that is the singular. Another common confusion is over criteria and criterion. The O-N word, again, is singular, and criteria is plural, and yet you hear people saying, there's one criteria that we must follow here, right? And I always think, oh, my goodness sake. So, you know, there are words like that. Data is another one. Data is actually plural, and so it should be the data are, not the data is. And that chapter on agreement covers that kind of issue. What's really plural, what's really singular. There are many words in our language that never take an S, and yet they can represent groups, right? Many elements like information and jewelry and advice and furniture. And if English is your native tongue, you know that automatically. Nobody had to teach you that. You've never heard those words with an S on the end. So it's easy to select the right verb. But if it's not your native tongue, imagine, it's difficult to come to a language where usually you can put an S on the end of the word and make it plural, and yet there are all these exceptions. So if it's not your native tongue and you're rather new to English, advices probably sounds fine to you. Informations? Probably not. Jewelries? Furnitures? Probably. So the book does address issues like that too, that crop up for non-native speakers, but primarily it's for native speakers, it's for educated native speakers, it's for people who know their language, as you do, and have to write. When we speak, we, of course, make mistakes. Speaking is a much more rapid activity. We just don't have the time to think about the proper grammar and usage beforehand. And when we speak, we have a lot more going for us than when we write. We have facial expressions. We've got this hand that waves around and the other one that holds a microphone. We've got going for us that we are speaking at our own pace, and the listener is trying to follow us. And so that person doesn't have a lot of time to think about our grammar or our word choice because they're busy keeping up, just trying to get the message. And yet when we write, we have a lot more time to create what the message is, and the reader has a lot more time to get it. The reader's going at his or her pace. There's something else that crops up in the agreement chapter. Pronouns have to agree with an earlier noun. I just said the reader is going at his or her pace, and that gets kind of cumbersome. And yet you can't just pretend the whole world is male anymore. Well, it probably was never so that you could pretend it in your lifetime, but in my lifetime, in the beginning, in writing, the masculine pronoun was perfectly acceptable, and that's all you ever saw. But there are ways around that, and the second chapter does address them. Anytime you get into that he, she, him, her, his, her bind, you have to realize it's because you're the one who chose to say reader earlier in that sentence, or visitor, or listener, or user, right? If you go back and make that word plural, readers, visitors, listeners, users, then you can follow it up with they and them and their, and you're out of the he, she bind. The third chapter is on verb tense, and native speakers of English don't have that many problems with tense. It's just automatic. We use present when we need it, past when we need it, future when we need it. We know how to form them. We've been hearing them our whole lives. But we do have some problems with verb tense, and those are represented here. For example, if you read an article yesterday, you'd be inclined to write or say about it that the article reported something, right? And yet that article is still reporting something. It's that you read it yesterday, and that past tense is in your memory, and so you are saying that the article reported that Google did something. Well, it could be that Google did something in the past, but the article is still reporting it. So that really should be present tense. The article reports that Google did something. Kind of interesting. Those are the kinds of issues that native speakers have with tense, and those crop up in Chapter 3. Let's see, case, agreement, tense, mood. There's something called mood in grammar. Not a good mood or a bad mood, but specifically a subjunctive mood. Never mind, you really don't need the terminology. Let me tell you what it translates into. When we're speculating about something, we have a choice. We are trying to convey to the listener or the reader that either what we're speculating about is possible or what we're speculating about is impossible, but we're speculating anyway. For example, if I were from Los Angeles, I would be chilly up here. If I were from Los Angeles, I would be chilly up here. You can hear from my verbs, were and would, that I'm not from Los Angeles, right? Now, if I change that sentence and say, if Carol is from Los Angeles, she is surely chilly up here. Now you probably get the message that it's possible that Carol's from Los Angeles. If Carol is from Los Angeles, she is probably chilly up here. Do you hear it? It's possible that she's from LA. Can you hear that possibility? Let me change the other sentence back into Carol because it should be consistent. I started with I. The reason I have switched over to Carol is if I don't know whether Carol's from Los Angeles, but it's possible, then I can use is. If she is from Los Angeles, then she is probably chilly, right? But I can't speculate that way about me. I know where I'm from, so that's why I had to switch over to Carol. Do you see? So let me put her in the subjunctive. If Carol were from Los Angeles, she would be chilly up here. Now you should be getting the message that she's not from LA, right? If she were from LA, she would do something. If she is from LA, she is probably a certain way. The sentence involving were and would should be conveying the message to you that it's not happening. I'm speculating about it anyway, but it's not happening. It's contrary to fact. And the other sentence should be conveying to you that it's possible. I just don't know. If she is a dancer, she probably needs money. If she were a dancer, she would need money. You hear the difference? That's what this chapter addresses because typical native speakers don't understand that we're supposed to be using were. They're using was in all those situations. They know they're speculating, but they're using was. You know, if I was there, well, are you there? No. You're speculating about something that isn't possible, right? So if I were there, not if I was there. Do we have to worry about this with every sentence? No. There are just certain words that lead to speculation. If is one of them. Every sentence involving if can be speculating about something that's not true or speculating about something that could be true. Wish is another one. Wish always leads to a statement that's contrary to fact, or you wouldn't be wishing. I wish I were. She wishes he were. No matter who's wishing, the verb should be were. It shouldn't be was. So the chapter addresses that. The next one's on modifiers, a real fancy term for words that describe, and you might say, oh, that's easy. Words that describe adjectives, right? Many of them are adjectives, in fact, but in forms that you were never told are adjectives. For example, if I say, while driving down the freeway, would you believe that whole phrase is an adjective? I'm describing somebody who's driving down the freeway. And the word in that opening phrase that is the descriptive word is the word driving. So when an opening phrase has an action word, like running, walking, swimming, dancing, driving, researching, analyzing, deciding, it doesn't matter, that word is trying to describe somebody or something. It's usually a somebody. And whoever it is has to follow the phrase. Let me give you an example, and you'll know that your gut understands this before your head does. Crawling across the yard, the snail intrigued the baby. Who's crawling? Crawling across the yard, the snail intrigued the baby. Who's crawling? The snail. You should think it's the snail. You have a good imagination if you think it's the baby. The baby came later. Crawling across the yard, the snail, hear it? Intrigued the baby. So you should be thinking it's the snail that's doing the crawling. On the other hand, if I change it and put the baby next to the crawling phrase, then you'll be right to assume that it's the kid who's crawling. Crawling across the yard, the baby followed the snail. crawling across the yard, the baby pursued the snail. Let me change the verb, make it a little more interesting. Crawling across the yard, the baby pursued the snail. You should be understanding that now it's the baby that's crawling across the yard. Whoever I put next to that crawling phrase is going to wind up crawling. Unless I put a word there that doesn't crawl, and then the reader goes, what? And so maybe the reader figures it out because he understands the context and he understands who can crawl and who can't. Still, it's not a good sentence, and it's not a sentence that most of us were taught about any time in high school or middle school or grammar school or even college. I could have a PhD in English today and not understand that kind of sentence structure. And the only reason I really understand all of these things is that I, during my graduate studies, focused on the teaching of writing. It's amazing, isn't it? But anyway, it's that kind of thing that crops up in the modifiers chapter. There's another really popular one, people saying, like I said, like I told you, and that really should be as I said and as I told you. And of course, there's a place for like, but not in that particular phrase, and that chapter explains that. After that, the 6th grammar chapter is on connectives, words that connect. We've got prepositions, as I mentioned them before, you know, the in, on, to, from. The key question that usually pops up is it against the rule to end a sentence in a preposition? And I think that's about all anybody ever remembers about prepositions, that at some point somebody told them not to end a sentence in one. Yet it's fine to do so as long as there's a word earlier in the sentence that goes with that preposition. It's pretty awkward to always tuck them back in. You can ruin a whole idiom. For example, there are certain things up with which I will not put. I mean, who writes like that? Who speaks like that? The idiom is to put up with. There are certain things that I won't put up with. Okay, that sentence ends in a preposition. So what? It's grammatically correct. It's a stylistic choice, whether you tuck it in or put it at the end. And certainly conjunctions are connectives too, and there are a couple of kinds of conjunctions, and they change the structure of a sentence, and your punctuation options are different depending on the kind of conjunction you're using. And then there are words very common in the business world that are not conjunctions at all, and many people don't realize that. There are words like however, furthermore, nevertheless, moreover, besides, also. Some of them are small, some of them are larger. They can show the relationship between two ideas, and they can occur right in the middle of two sentences, but you need more than a comma to connect those two ideas, because those particular words, however, furthermore, therefore, nevertheless, moreover, they're not conjunctions. They don't have glue on them. They're just transition words. They have meaning. They're wonderful to use stylistically, and as I say, they're very popular in the business world. But after the first idea, the minimum punctuation you should have is a semicolon. For example, I enjoy teaching, however, I'm not going to do it for the rest of my life. Huh? The most common error that I've seen over the last 35 years of teaching is that people put a comma before and after that, however. I enjoy teaching, comma, however, comma, I'm not going to do it for the rest of my life, and that is not kosher, it's not allowable, it's not a stylistic option. You don't have a glue word in the middle. You have a transition word. It shows the relationship between the two ideas, but it doesn't join them. So all you can really do if you want those two ideas in the same sentence is to put a semicolon after the first idea. And yes, there will be a comma after the however, or the furthermore, or the therefore, because they are introductory words. They're introducing the second idea. Your only other option is to put a period. You can make two sentences out of them, but people know that. What people don't understand is that these words don't join ideas. And so if you want the two ideas in the same sentence, you still need some glue, and the semicolon is that glue. So that kind of thing is in the connectives chapter. Also, the notion of parallel structures in there, meaning items in a series have to match, because whenever you have connecting words, what are you connecting? Words or phrases or whole ideas, and they have to match each other. So you, of course, may not write Mary Jane enjoys hiking, baking, and to ski. That's an error in parallel structure. Items in a series have to all be parallel, right? And you may be sitting there thinking, oh, easy, I would never write Mary Jane enjoys hiking, baking, and to ski. No, because those words are close together and your ear wouldn't allow it. But when you add more words into the sentence, which is more typical of business writing, certainly, your ear doesn't always catch the problem. So it could be Mary Jane enjoys hiking on Mount Tamalpais in the springtime, baking cookies whenever it rains, and to ski at Lake Tahoe in the winter. You see? The ear doesn't catch it right away. Your ear may be catching it. You may have an excellent ear. Or you may be aware of the error because I just gave you the simplified version of it and you're looking for it. But typically, when more words are involved in each of the items, people aren't so sensitive to whether they match each other. And we really should be. I just used the word whether, which reminds me of another connective issue. Native speakers of English are always using if when we should be using whether. Typical mistake. We need to know if we're going to proceed with this project. No, we need to know whether we're going to proceed with this project. Why? Because when or not is understood, when the word or not can be placed into the sentence, you don't have to write it and you don't have to say it. But when you can place it in there, that means the connecting word you need is whether. So we need to know whether or not we're going to proceed with this project. Not if. If sets up a condition. If we proceed with this project, we're going to need more money. In other words, upon a certain condition, we're going to need more money. So that distinction is also made in the connectives chapter. And then the last chapter, as I told you, is punctuation. You may be saying, oh my God, all these little tiny picky nitty-gritty things. That's English for you. It's probably any language, but here we are with English. And actually, it's a very thin book, as you can see. So it's obviously not covering everything that could be covered under the sun about this language. But believe me, because I've been in the classroom with people in business settings and at universities and private organizations and government agencies for so long, I do understand what even good writers don't always know, and that's what's in this book. Anyhow, I'll bet you've got some questions, and I would love to answer them. So if you do, please speak up. Yes?
So language evolves over time with people using it perhaps incorrectly. So whom is probably going to become who, right? And there are other things like less and fewer, right? Like the grocery store, you would check out, it's like 8 items or less when it should be 8 items or fewer, right? Is this kind of thing ongoing, and will fewer become obsolete?
Well, I'm not a soothsayer. I don't know what will and won't become obsolete. Whom is still with us. Professional writers and editors are still using whom, and that's discussed in chapter 1 of my book. I can't say, oh, forget about it. You could avoid it and get around it and reword this sentence so that you don't need it. Sometimes, to be honest, I don't use it where it belongs. I'll reword this sentence because it sounds a little stuffy, and that's not the tone I want. Other times it's fine. Like, whom did you vote for? I mean, that's fine with me. It doesn't sound too bad. But other times I will rewrite this sentence just because of the tone of whom. It may disappear. I understand that's your question. Fewer versus less. Have you seen the grocery stores lately? You know, about 8 months ago, I went into a Trader Joe's, and it said 8 items or less. And I went up to the, I'm crazy, I'm busy. I went up to the customer service department. I said, you know, that really should be fewer. It shouldn't be less. It really should be. And then I went back to that Trader Joe's in a couple of weeks, and they hadn't changed the sign. Months later, all the signs at the Trader Joe's were changed to fewer. Whole Foods had fewer to begin with. I mean, the word fewer in their signs. They were correct right on. Of course they would be. So, you know, some do, some don't. Will it disappear? I don't know. You know, grammar seems to be coming back. People seem to be caring about the correct use of the language, and who knows. Nothing has changed in my lifetime. Let me put it that way. We're talking about 6 decades here. Nothing has changed in my lifetime except a punctuation issue. When I was about 30, publishers were putting periods and commas inside or outside closing quotation marks depending on what they belonged to, and then it changed. And so now, when it's time for a comma or a period, and it's also time for a closing quotation mark, that comma or period goes inside. Don't even think about it. Well, what if the sentence is 25 words long and only the last word's in quotes? I said, don't think about it. Just put the period inside, because there's not an option in this country. And I say this country because that's what we do here. It's not what they do in England or Australia or Canada, but it is what we do here. That's the only thing that's changed. What a long answer to a short question. What else? Yes?
What do you think could be done in schools to teach these rules better? Because it seems that a lot of English teachers teach you the basic rules, but are kind of lax about some of the structures that you're.
I think all the schools should just order my book and use it. Seriously, I wish I had a way. You know, my book so far has not been marketed to schools. My publisher didn't aim for schools. They aimed for the marketplace, for the ordinary individual who has to write, which is practically everybody. And I'm not averse to that. I like it being everywhere and in all bookstores, and on Amazon. But I wish it were marketed. I wish it had been marketed to the schools, because I think that a book like this would be immensely useful. And you're right to say that teachers are, did you say lax? I'm not sure they're lax. I'm not sure they know all of the information that they should really be conveying. It's a specialized field. And as I said a moment ago, if I hadn't specialized in the teaching of writing as a graduate student, had I not planned on teaching writing at the college level, I would be one of those teachers too. You know, understanding the language pretty well on a gut level, but not really not being able to communicate it really clearly as to why it's this way. The word why reminds me of something else, and it happens in the Connectives chapter. The reason why is because. Bull, what a common locution these days. If you're using reason, you don't need to say why, and you don't need to say because. It's redundant. They all three mean the same thing. So if you've begun a sentence with reason, don't use why, and don't say is because. The little connecting word you need is that. The reason I was late today is that there was a lot of traffic. Not the reason I was late is because there was a lot of traffic, and not the reason why I was late is because there was a lot of traffic. Do you understand what's going on? Reason says it all. If you don't have the word reason, you can use the word because. If you don't have reason or because, you can use the word why. But not together. Sorry. I digress. Another question. Yes, in the back. Oh, wait one moment. You're going to get a booming voice.
Can you talk a little bit about active versus passive verbs? I was always told in school to avoid passive verbs like the plague, and to just structure your sentences to always include an active verb. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can talk a lot about that. I'm not sure you'd want to hear it. By the way, it's not covered in my book, because active and passive voice, and I'm glad you called it voice and not tense. Usually people call it tense, which it isn't, are matters of style. This is style we're talking about here. The active voice is correct and the passive voice is correct. And you know what else? These days there's not a huge problem people using the passive when they should be using the active. We've sort of come over that hump in our society. When I began teaching writing in organizations and in businesses, the passive voice was all too prevalent, and now it's really not. So we've improved. But for those of you who are sitting there thinking, what the heck are they talking about? Anytime you have an idea, you're going to have a subject and a verb. Even the simplest of ideas, you know, the dog ate the bone. You got somebody at the beginning and you have an action happening. If that somebody at the beginning is doing the action, and by the way, tense has nothing to do with this. It doesn't matter whether the dog ate the bone yesterday, whether he is eating it presently, whether he will eat it tomorrow, or whether he had eaten it before I did something else. That dog is the agent of the action, regardless of when it took place. That whole idea is said to be written in the active voice. So the dog ate the bone is active. It also has nothing to do with meaning. If I say the man lay dead on the floor, that's active. People go, but he's dead. I told you, it had nothing to do with meaning. Did the man do the lying on the floor? Did the man lie on the floor? I said the man lay, L-A-Y, because that's the past tense of L-I-E, believe it or not. That's in my book too. Anyhow, but that's an active sentence because the man did the lying on the floor. The man did the action. Whether the dog eats the bone now, will eat it tomorrow, did eat it yesterday, he's doing the action. That's called active. If I turn it around and start that same idea with the bone, I'm going to get what we call passive. And I'll tell you why in a moment. The bone was eaten by the dog. Same idea, right? But now I've got the bone in the subject position. Grammatically, it's the subject, and psychologically, it's the subject. When I say the bone was eaten by the dog, you should be getting the message that this sentence is about the bone. It's kind of incidental that the guy who ate it is the dog, right? The dog ate the bone. Subject, dog. Focal point, dog. The bone was eaten by the dog. Subject, bone. Focal point, bone, right? That's called passive because the new subject, bone, didn't do the eating. The bone was eaten. It was considered. It had been decided. It was recommended. You hear those? Those are typically passive constructions. The subject of those last three examples is it, and yet it didn't do the deciding or the recommending or the considering, right? Who did? And this is why the gentleman in the back was told a while back by teachers, avoid the passive voice. We don't always need to avoid the passive voice. It's just that it's a lot better style to say who recommended, who decided, who considered in the business world. And lately, people know that, and they're not hiding. They're not saying it is recommended that something be done. They're saying management recommends that we do something, right? Isn't that more typical in the work environment now? Great. We got over one problem in this society. So that's probably, well, that's one of the reasons teachers were telling you to stay away from passivity. The other thing is, a passive idea, the bone was eaten by the dog, always requires more words than an active idea. The dog ate the bone. You hear it? 5 for dog ate the bone. 7 for the bone was eaten by the dog. Because to create a passive verb, you have to add a was or an is or a will be before another verb. Was eaten versus ate. And then to tell who did it, if you're going to give all the information, you've got to add a little by at the end. Now, passivity comes in handy, however, when this whole paragraph is going to be about the bone. And I don't mind telling you who ate it, but I'm not going to start by putting the spotlight on the dog when the rest of the focus will be on the bone. So that would be a good time to say the bone was eaten by the dog. I could add, you might say, oh, that's such a simple sentence. Well, I'm trying to give you the skeletal version so you'll understand the answer to the question. I can add more details. I can say, under the shade of a magnolia tree in 1938, the bone was eaten by the dog with great gusto. Still passive. There's only one subject and verb. I just gave you a lot of description telling you when and where and how that bone was eaten. But it's still passive because that bone was still eaten. And if the rest of the paragraph or report is about the bone, then that's a good choice. There's another time passivity is very useful, and that's when we don't know who ate the bone. So, but we do know it was eaten. So under the shade of a magnolia tree in southeastern Alabama in 1938, the bone was eaten with great gusto. You see, it's useful. When we don't know who did what, the passive voice serves us well. I would say that as a group, you don't need to think about this, although I did want to answer your question, and it may have been interesting for some of you too. But mostly now we're using active voice, telling who does what, who did what, who would do what if she could do what, appropriately. And we are using passive voice automatically when we want to shift the focus onto the phone went unanswered. The phone was unanswered. You know, I have no interest in saying who didn't answer the phone. That's not my point. I'm saying the phone was unanswered. Right? So I think it's pretty automatic now, and I think we're in good shape. But does that help? Another question?
Hi, I'm curious to hear your opinion on corporate buzzwords. So here we say a lot of terms that maybe are changed from their original meaning to sound more corporate. So some examples are takeaways, learnings, like what are the learnings from this presentation? One thing that we say a lot on my team is bottom lining. So instead of saying what's the bottom line, we'll say, you know, make sure you're bottom lining, or make sure you're working on your bottom lining skills. I mean, it drives me insane.
Does it? I think it's creative.
But it,
why not?
It serves a purpose.
It serves a purpose, and it also makes you feel more closely related to your language, that you can change it to suit your needs. English is very elastic, very flexible. It's incorporated all kinds of new vocabulary words since you've been alive, since I've been alive, and long before that. I think it's great that you can take a word that used to be just in this form and add an ing, and everybody knows what you're talking about, and it's infused with a new life somehow. So if it suits the organization, everybody knows what you're talking about, and it brings you a little closer because you're the only guys who are bottom lining these days, why not? Although, are you? I don't know. You know, you may be starting a trend. I understand what you're saying, that when things aren't used as we were taught to use them, it can be aggravating. As you say, it's driving you crazy. But you asked me what I think. It wouldn't drive me crazy. I think it's adorable. I'd go right into it if I could. I don't work for Google, so I'm not going to be bottom lining, but it's makes one think. It's refreshing, I think. That's just my take. Huh? This is just an opinion. There's no rule. Anybody else? Yes?
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around a specific example that you said.
Which one?
So data is plural.
It is.
So the data were complicated?
That's right. And they probably still are because they still exist. See, that's the other thing about
people
tense.
use is because it sounds like idiom, like the idiom. Like, why do people use is? The data is complicated.
They don't understand that it's a Latin word that is plural. That's why. I think it's really a matter of maybe ignorance is too harsh a word, but not knowing. How about that? Kind of like bottom lining. That's what I think. They don't understand that data is plural. The word data, yeah. Phenomena is plural. So, to say this is a new phenomena is not right. Phenomenon with an O-N. These are just words that come from Latin, and we still have them in our language as they were born. They didn't change a whit. And, we get used to a lot of mistakes, and so they don't sound bad anymore. For example, probably like I said doesn't bother you at all. You're used to it. Hardly anybody says as I said. So perhaps before I began to speak, you weren't bothered by the reason why we did this is because funding was short at the time. Maybe that wouldn't have bothered you either. Maybe it won't bother you in the future. God bless you. How wonderful. Bothers me terribly. So when we get used to hearing something over and over and over, we think it's fine. And then somebody comes up and says, no, it's not. And that's going to bother you for a while. Surely. Comma. Surely. Period. Who else? Yes. Oh.
So I had a quick question. I see this a lot of times in English, and I wasn't sure if it was correct, but a lot of times I'll see something like, I want to tell you, or I want to write you to let you know, or along those lines. And use the past tense with I wanted.
Oh, yes. Again, remember a moment ago I was saying that because we read something in the past, we tend to ascribe past tense to that thing, like the article stated or the report implied. And we have to remember, no, I read it in the past, but the article is still stating and the report is still implying, and they should be present tense. Same thing happens when we write sentences like the one that you just gave. I wanted to let you know. Well, don't you still want to let the person know? It's a habit. And everybody's fallen into it, and it sounds fine, and nobody looks at it. When you do look at it, though, you realize you don't need an ED there. Get rid of it. I want to let you know. It's a small change, but everything in my book and everything we're talking about is a small change. You put them all together, and they make a big difference in the way your writing comes across. I want to let you know. Another one along those same lines, to use your phrase, is, let me see. What is it? Something about receiving your letter. Oh, it's a little different. We have received your letter of October 15th. How many times did you receive that letter? Because have done something is supposed to be for repeated past action. And if it just happened once, you should be writing, we received your letter. That's what that reminds me of. But you're right. I wanted to let you know. I wanted to thank you. Oh, you don't still want? You do still want. So, take a closer look at it. I just remembered I'm not supposed to cross this line, which is why I made a face. Anyway, that's a good question.
So, kind of to follow up on that. So, if you said something like, "I ate at a restaurant last night," the vibe was great, or the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is still there.
Yes.
So would you say the atmosphere is great or was great?
Well, it depends on what you're counting as atmosphere. If it includes the people and the particular food that was served and the fact that there was a party singing next to you, I don't know. It could be a was. The vibe was great, the atmosphere was great. If you're not sure that it still is great or that it will be when somebody else goes there, you can use the past tense. So that one's up for grabs. The decor is beautiful. Probably they didn't change the decor in one day. We can be careful and think about this, especially when we write. We don't always think about all these issues when we speak. And so errors tumble out of our mouths. But as I say, listeners are much more forgiving than readers. Forgiving. They don't even notice what we're doing when we're talking. They're just trying to keep up. But you put it on paper and people do notice. They don't always know what it is, but they get a feeling like, uh-oh, that read funny, right? That didn't seem right. So anyway, that's a good question. Any other question?
Right here.
Right.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi, I just wanted to know your opinion on using contractions in emails and writing. Is it too informal? That's kind of what we're taught in college and school, I think, but in business writing,
What do you think I'm going to say? I'm just curious.
that it's okay.
Yeah. I seem like that kind of girl, don't I? It's just fine. I mean, if I like bottom lining, why would I be against contractions? It really depends on the tone of your document and the kind of document. If you're writing to a coworker or a friend, certainly, if it's an informal document, you should write as you speak, for the most part. A little bit better in that we'll try to get over the errors we have when we speak. But I think contractions are marvelous for that. They mimic the way in which we ordinarily use the language. On the other hand, if you're writing a formal report or an analysis of some sort, and it's far-reaching, or even if it's not far-reaching, but it's going to somebody at the top or somebody who's going to make a decision, and you want this document to seem more formal, then don't contract. Or if you want to emphasize the not in a sentence, we do not put up with this kind of behavior rather than we don't put up with this. You hear it? It's much more emphatic. So there are times for spelling out, certainly, but I would say go with what you would do when you speak. Sometimes we speak more formally because we're addressing groups or we're talking about a serious issue, and we don't even use contractions then. So I would go with my gut if I were you, not if I was you. Yes?
I'd like to know your opinion on people communicating over BlackBerries for business purposes. So typically out of the office, could be late or even early before going to work. Are they excused for contractions like thanks, THX, in those situations? Or is that an egregious error?
No, of course it's not an error. In a space that small, what the hell could you communicate if you didn't abbreviate? I mean, and it's a challenge. It's a new game. It's a whole new opportunity for your mind to come up with creative abbreviations that you're sure your reader will understand. I guess you're not trying to hang the reader up half a day to understand what you were talking about. But that's perfectly fine and logical, as a matter of fact. Right? That doesn't fall into the realm of error. That's deliberate. That's a challenge. That's fun.
This is kind of in the same vein, and I apologize if you already addressed this. I got here a little late. In back-to-back or back-and-forth email communication, is it necessary to always say, hi, so-and-so?
Gets old, doesn't it?
I mean, if it's back and forth, can you just go right into what you're about to say?
Well, I don't think there are any rules for this. I can tell you what I do, that I don't say hi so-and-so every time, and often I don't even say Janice at the end. It's like a conversation, right? The only difference is there's a little bit more of a delay, sometimes not much of one, between what one person says and the other person says. But if you're going back and forth like that and it's absolutely clear what the context is and that other person knows who's writing and what about, well, I don't see any problem with leaving off the hi Linda and the love Bill.
And also, do you recommend any sort of etiquette for correcting others' grammar? When is that appropriate? I've always understood that it is not appropriate unless you're an English teacher to sort of correct someone else's grammar, but maybe you have a different opinion.
And it isn't always appropriate when you're an English teacher either. I suggest that you give your take on a grammar situation when somebody asks you. That's what I suggest. Even I don't correct people's grammar when they're writing to me or when they're speaking to me. Because, first of all, they haven't asked for it, and it derails the conversation, even if I weren't an English teacher, and maybe it's a little bit more forgivable because I am, as you suggest, but still, it takes the conversation into grammar, and that's not what we were talking about. It also probably makes the person feel ill at ease, if not embarrassed, or maybe even a little less than friendly toward you, the one who did it. But, there are people who do ask questions, especially of me, and maybe even of you. Should it be of, should it be to? What would you do? Would you say of or to here? And sometimes either one works, sometimes one is preferable, and you can certainly give your answer. I would have to say, what's the situation? I mean, if it's a cousin of yours or a sister or a coworker whose performance you're trying to improve, I think I would still get that person's solicitation. I would wait for the question. I would wait for that person to ask me to help out. Are you inclined to do that? No. No. I mean, I do it in my head. I do it in my head when people speak. But I'm not going to say, hey, that if should have been a whether. Hey, you know what? You've got a double negative in that sentence. And it doesn't. You know what? Your parallel structure is off. You know what? You're throwing the word only in too soon every time. That's such a cute one, by the way. We do throw the word only in too soon most of the time. Let me give you a sentence with, let me give you a typical error. Yesterday, I only rented a Volkswagen. Now, I don't know what kind of meaning you get out of that. Probably from my inflection, my face, my hand, you're understanding that a Volkswagen is not a very big car or a very big expenditure or something like that. It's just a Volkswagen. But what I actually said is yesterday I only rented. That's what I said. That's not the inflection I gave it, but your writing doesn't have inflection. Your writing doesn't have any tone to it or any verbal emphasis to it. So if somebody reads, yesterday I only rented a Volkswagen, that's indeed the message they may get, that you just rented one. You didn't buy one. Look at how the meaning changes depending on where I put only. I'm going to take that same core sentence. Only yesterday I rented a Volkswagen. Yesterday only I rented a Volkswagen. Yesterday I only rented a Volkswagen. Yesterday I rented only a Volkswagen. You see what's happening? Only shines its light to the right. It shines its light on the next word. So if I say only yesterday, you get it. Oh, so recently. If I say only I, you get it. No one else. Only rented, didn't buy. Only a Volkswagen, no big deal. The same thing happens if I put it at the end of the sentence. Yesterday I rented a Volkswagen only. It can't shine its light to the right because there ain't nothing to the right. So it goes back on the Volkswagen. In other words, if I say only a Volkswagen, the meaning is the same as a Volkswagen only, period, because there's only one word that only can shine its light on, and that is the word Volkswagen. I'm hearing onlys thrown in too soon all the time. And yet when I hear them, I don't say, hey, your only should have been a little bit later, you didn't wait. No, certainly not. But I note it, and that's how, noting and seeing and hearing and reading and knowing all these years is what made me distill the most common problems for people whose grasp of the language is firm and put them in this little book. I'm so happy that I don't have to convince you to get this book. You have this book. It's in front of you. I hope only that you enjoy it. See, most people would say, I only hope. Wouldn't they? Isn't that common? I only hope that you enjoy it. I only hope, that's all I'm doing is hoping. What a small action hoping is. Is that what I'm trying to say? No. I'm trying to say, I hope only one thing. I hope only that you'll enjoy it. Interesting, huh? Now you're going to start hearing all the premature onlys in the sentences around you. They're plentiful, believe me. Anybody else have a question? Yes?
Well, thank you first, Janis, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And I assure you that if we see anybody in this room saying only or whether inappropriate, or only or if inappropriately, we'll make sure to call them out. But I was actually curious. You said you haven't seen a lot of trends except for the inside the quotation marks, period, comma, whatever. In the writing of your students, have you seen any just general abilities changing better or worse? I've actually heard a teacher say or claim that the writing has gotten better since the internet age because we're more comfortable with our medium, the computer, and we're also more concise in general. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but have you seen any trends like that change since the real inundation of the computer?
Honestly, no. When the word processor first came into being, people were saying, oh, it's going to make everybody's writing so much better. Well, it made it easier to type, it made it easier to correct, but the grammar and the usage and the punctuation were exactly the same. And the same thing with the way computers are nowadays. I mean, they make the process of writing the easiest it can possibly be, and that's wonderful. And you can do anything you want to do and embellish it in any way you want. But people's understanding of the language hasn't changed, and therefore I would say that perhaps it's just gotten a little less formal, which our whole society has gotten. Language has gotten less formal because of popularity of email and the frequency with which we now write to one another. But, I'm constantly seeing IT'(s) where it doesn't belong all over the email. I'm seeing commas in between complete sentences, complete sentence, comma, complete sentence, comma, complete sentence, period. Just because they're short and they're related, people don't know how to join them. So I don't see that changing. I really don't.
One last question.
If I did, I wouldn't have a job.
All right. Well, thank you again, Janis, for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure you'll be staying around to answer any other last questions you didn't want to throw out in the mic.
I sure will, and I also want to tell people to feel free to go to my website, which is janisbell.com. Janis is the Janis part. And there's a little bit of information and even a song that I sing to greet you. You'll enjoy it.
Janis is also going to be sticking around to sign books if anybody's interested in that. So.
Thanks so much.